I'll never forget the sound my phone made when it shattered against the wall. The glass exploded into 1,000 pieces, each one catching the light from the chandelier above, and for a split second, it looked almost beautiful. Then, my father's hand connected with my face again, and I tasted blood. "You thief!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You were trying to hack my account to destroy your brother's career." My mother stood frozen by the dining table, her hand covering her mouth. My brother Lucas smirked from his seat, his arm draped around his fiancée Tiffany, who was laughing. Actually laughing. She had just thrown her wine in my face moments before, and the red liquid was still dripping down my chin, mixing with the blood from my split lip. "Dad, just throw her out already," Lucas said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's ruining our celebration." And that's when my father said the words that would change everything. "You're not my daughter anymore. Get out. Get out of my house and never come back." But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. If you want to hear how a homeless-looking girl became the woman who would destroy her entire family in less than 72 hours, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to blow your mind. Drop a comment below telling me what you would do in my situation. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Antonia, though everyone calls me Tony. I'm 29 years old, and for the past 7 years I've lived a double life so elaborate that even the best Hollywood screenplay couldn't match it. To my family, I was the failure. The daughter who couldn't hold down a job, who dressed in thrift store clothes, who lived in a tiny studio apartment in the worst part of Chicago. They thought I was barely surviving, probably on welfare, definitely a disappointment to the prestigious family name. What they didn't know was that I was the shark. That's what they called me in the boardrooms of Chicago's biggest corporations. At 22, fresh out of business school, I had started acquiring struggling companies, restructuring them, and flipping them for massive profits. By 25, I had my first 100 million. By 27, I was a ghost in the business world, someone whose name never appeared in Forbes or Business Insider, but whose influence could make or break entire industries. I owned 17 companies outright and held controlling shares in 32 others. My personal worth was somewhere north of $2 billion, though I'd stopped counting after the first billion. I maintained my facade of poverty deliberately. Every Saturday, I would change out of my custom-tailored suits, remove my jewelry, put on my bargain store jeans and faded sweater, and drive my beat-up Honda Civic, which I kept specifically for family visits to my parents' house in the suburbs. I would endure their contempt, their mockery, their endless comparisons to my older brother Lucas. Perfect Lucas, who worked in middle management at some logistics company. Golden boy Lucas, who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. My father, Winston, was a man who worshipped money and status above all else. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, always impeccably dressed, and completely convinced that women were inferior to men in every way that mattered. My mother, Philippa, was his shadow. She had no opinions of her own, or if she did, she had buried them so deep over 30 years of marriage that they would never see daylight again. She simply echoed whatever my father and Lucas said, nodding along like a puppet. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, wealthier than my father could ever dream of, being more successful than Lucas would be in 10 lifetimes, and yet I sat at their table every week and let them treat me like garbage. Why? Because some pathetic part of me kept hoping that one day they would love me for who I was, not for what I could give them. Some naive part of me thought that if I just endured a little longer, they would see me, really see me, and realize I had value. I was so stupidly wrong. The Saturday that changed everything started like any other. I had just closed a deal to acquire Vanguard Logistics for $500 million. The former CEO, a man named Richard Chen, who had run the company into near bankruptcy through a combination of arrogance and incompetence, had sat across from me in the back of my limousine, his hand shaking as he signed the papers. "Please," he had begged, "let me keep my seat on the board. I built this company. I deserve to stay." I had looked at him with the cold detachment I had perfected over years of cutthroat business deals. "You're done, Richard. Retire. Your time is over." I had watched him stumble out of my car, a broken man, and felt nothing. In business, sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad, and I already knew what was coming. I answered, putting on my meek, apologetic voice, the one I used only for them. "Hi, Dad." His voice came through harsh and angry, the way it always did when he spoke to me. "Are you coming today? Or should I just lock the door? Lucas is bringing Tiffany home to meet us properly. Don't embarrass me with that homeless person look of yours." I stared out the window of my limousine at the Chicago skyline, the buildings I owned reflecting the late afternoon sun. "I'll be there, Dad. I'll bring a surprise." "Just don't be late," he snapped and hung up. I directed my driver to take me to the garage, where I kept my civilian car. I changed clothes in the private bathroom, carefully removing my Harry Winston diamond earrings, my Cartier watch, my Hermes Birkin bag. Well, actually, I kept the Birkin. It was a limited edition piece without any visible logo, and I knew my family wouldn't recognize it. To them, it would look like a cheap knockoff from some street market. The irony amused me. I pulled out my hair back with a drugstore elastic band, the only thing I had left from my old life before I became the shark. Then, I got into my 15-year-old Honda Civic and drove to the suburbs. My parents' house was a modest 2-story colonial, the kind of house that screamed middle class, trying to look upper middle class. My father had bought it 20 years ago with a mortgage he was still paying off. The lawn was perfectly manicured because appearances were everything to Winston. I parked on the street as I always did, not wanting to take up space in the driveway that might be needed for more important guests. When I walked through the front door, the smell of my mother's pot roast filled the air. The house was decorated for a celebration with champagne bottles on ice and fancy hors d'oeuvres laid out on silver platters that my mother only brought out for special occasions. Lucas was standing in the living room, and next to him was Tiffany. I had done my research on Tiffany, of course. I knew everything about her. She was 26, a former Instagram model whose 50 minutes of fame had ended about 3 years ago. Her follower count had been in decline ever since, and her modelling gigs had dried up. She came from old money that had run out 2 generations ago, leaving her family with nothing but a prestigious last name and a lot of debt. She was hunting for a rich husband, and she thought she had found one in Lucas. The moment I walked in, Tiffany's eyes travelled from my scuffed sneakers up to my faded jeans, lingering on my plain sweater and finally reaching my face. Her lip curled in disgust. "Oh my God, Lucas, is this your sister?" Her voice was high-pitched and nasal, with that particular tone that rich girls use when they're pretending to be shocked, but are really just being cruel. "She looks like your housemaid or something. Is that bag from a flea market?" She pointed at my Birkin, which had cost more than her entire year's rent. Lucas laughed, that braying sound he made when he thought he was being clever. "Cut her some slack, babe. Tony's going through a phase. She's trying to find herself or whatever." He turned to me, his smile condescending. "Tony, why don't you go help Mum in the kitchen? You're kind of bringing down the vibe here." I smiled softly the way I always did, and nodded. I went to the kitchen, where my mother was pulling the roast out of the oven. "Hi, Mum." She glanced at me, her eyes flicking over my outfit with barely concealed disappointment. "Hello, dear. Could you set the table? Make sure you use the good china. Lucas's girlfriend comes from a very good family." Of course she did. Dinner was exactly as excruciating as I had expected. We sat around the dining table, me at the far end, practically falling off the edge while Lucas and Tiffany held court in the centre, my father at the head beaming with pride. Lucas was going on and on about his big news. So I got a call from the CEO himself, Greg Miller. He wants me to be the new regional director for Vanguard Logistics. It's a huge promotion, Dad. Huge. 6-figure salary, company car, the works. My father pounded the table with his fist, making the silverware jump. "That's my boy. I always knew you had it in you, son. This calls for champagne. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and said nothing. I knew the truth. Greg Miller was a con artist who had been running a scheme within Vanguard for the past 18 months, promoting people to fake positions, getting them to invest their own money into training programs and executive development courses, and then disappearing with the cash. I had discovered it during my due diligence before acquiring the company. Greg Miller was going to be arrested by the FBI within the next 72 hours. Lucas's promotion wasn't real. It was a trap. I could have said something. I could have warned him. But I had learned over the years that warning my family about anything was pointless. They never listened. They just accused me of being jealous. Lucas pulled out a stack of bills from his pocket and threw them on the table in front of me. They were mostly ones and fives, maybe $100 total. Here, Tony, take this. Go buy yourself some decent clothes. Sitting next to you makes Tiffany look bad. Tiffany giggled her hand on Lucas's arm. Baby, you're so generous, but honestly, I don't think any amount of money could help that situation. She gestured vaguely in my direction. My mother said nothing. My father laughed. And something inside me, something that had been cracking for years, started to splinter. Then my father pulled out a piece of paper. Tony, I need you to sign this. I looked at the document. It was a promissory note for $74,000 as the amount of my old student loans. Loans that my father had promised to pay off when I graduated, but instead had taken the money I had earned from my summer internships and used it to buy Lucas a BMW for his birthday. Dad, I already paid off those loans years ago. His face turned red. Don't lie to me. I need you to take responsibility for this debt. Lucas needs that money for his new position. He has expenses. I looked at the paper, then at my father, then at Lucas, who was smirking at me. No, I said quietly. I'm not signing it. And, Lucas, that promotion isn't real. Greg Miller is running a scam. The room went silent. Then Lucas exploded. He slammed his hands on the table, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. You jealous bitch! You can't stand to see me succeed. You want to ruin this for me because you're a failure. Tiffany stood up too, grabbing her wine glass. You're pathetic, she hissed at me. Your brother is going to be a director and you're nothing but trash. And then she threw the wine in my face. The red liquid hit me like a slap, cold and shocking. It ran down my face, staining my sweater, dripping onto my lap. For a moment, no one moved. Then my father stood up, his face purple with rage. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed my Birkin bag from where I had set it on the floor, and dumped its contents onto the table. My backup phone clattered out, and because I had been monitoring my father's bank account to prevent this exact kind of fraud, there was a notification on the screen showing his account details. My father saw it, and his eyes went wild. You were trying to steal from me. You were going to hack my account to sabotage Lucas's career. I tried to explain. Dad, no, I was protecting you from... But he didn't let me finish. His hand came across my face so hard that I saw stars. The slap echoed through the dining room. My mother gasped but didn't move. Tiffany was smiling. Lucas was shouting something, but I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. My father grabbed my phone and threw it against the wall with all his strength. It exploded in a shower of glass and plastic. Get out! He screamed. You're not my daughter. Transfer money to Lucas right now, and then get out of my house forever. He turned to Lucas, pulling out his tablet. Son, make the transfer. Take whatever you need from my account for your new position. I stood up slowly. Blood was dripping from my split lip. My face was throbbing. Wine was still dripping from my hair. I looked at each of them. My father red-faced and righteous, my mother pale and silent, Lucas gleeful and victorious, Tiffany disgusted and superior. And I felt something I had never felt before. Not sadness, not hurt, just a cold, crystalline clarity. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out of the house, leaving my broken phone behind. The rain started as soon as I stepped outside, a cold autumn downpour that soaked through my cheap sweater in seconds. I walked past my Honda Civic, past the neighbour's house to where my Porsche 911 Turbo S was parked under a tree. They had probably assumed it belonged to one of the neighbours. I pulled the key fob from my inner jacket pocket and pressed the button. The headlights flashed. The engine purred to life, and I got in. Inside, in the glove compartment, I had my backup phone, my real phone. I pulled it out and dialed my CFO David Chen, brother of the man I had fired earlier that day. "David, it's me." "What do you need, boss?" His voice was calm, professional. He was used to my late-night calls. "Activate Operation Zero. Freeze all Vanguard assets. Terminate Lucas Chen's employment effective immediately. And block my father's bank transfer, but make the error message say account holder does not have sufficient credibility." There was a pause. "Boss, are you sure?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I spent the weekend in my penthouse apartment, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the one my family didn't know existed. I didn't sleep. I spent those 48 hours making phone calls, moving pieces on a chessboard that my family didn't even know they were playing on. I called in favours. I activated protocols I had put in place years ago just in case. By Sunday night, everything was ready. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. I stood in front of my closet and selected a custom-tailored Armani suit in charcoal grey. I put on my Louboutin heels. I clasped my grandmother's pearls around my neck, the only thing of value I had inherited, which I had bought back at auction after my father had sold them to pay for Lucas's wedding to his first wife. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognised the woman staring back. She looked powerful, dangerous, free. Meanwhile, across town, Lucas was having the morning of his life. He had dressed in his best suit, the one he had bought on credit and hadn't paid off yet. He had styled his hair with expensive gel. Tiffany was with him, wearing a designer dress she had borrowed from a friend and planned to return after today. They drove to the Vanguard building in Lucas's BMW, the one my father had bought him with my internship money, singing along to the radio on top of the world. I know this because I watched it happen on the security cameras I had accessed remotely. I watched Lucas and Tiffany walk into the building like they owned it, his arm around her waist, her giggling at something he said. They approached the security desk in the lobby. Lucas swiped his keycard. The light turned red. Access denied. Lucas tried again. Red again. "There must be a mistake," he said to the security guard, his voice already taking on an edge of panic. The guard, who had been briefed by my head of security that morning, looked at his computer screen. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to need you to go up to the executive conference room. The new chairman wants to see you." Lucas's chest puffed up. "Well, of course, I'm the new regional director. I should meet with the chairman." Tiffany squeezed his arm, her eyes shining. They rode the elevator to the top floor. I watched on the cameras. Lucas was adjusting his tie, practicing his firm handshake. Tiffany was checking her makeup in her compact mirror. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The conference room was glass-walled, overlooking the Chicago skyline. When Lucas and Tiffany walked in, they found more than they bargained for. My father was there, sitting in a chair against the wall, looking confused and angry. Greg Miller was there too, in handcuffs, flanked by 2 FBI agents. And at the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, sat me. I watched Lucas's face go through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, horror. "Tony," his voice cracked on my name. Tiffany just stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Surprise," I said coldly. I stood up, smoothing down my suit jacket. "Let me properly introduce myself. I'm Antonia Castellano, sole owner and chairman of Vanguard Logistics as of last Friday. Hello, former employee, Lucas." "Hello, Dad." My father found his voice first. "What is this? What kind of joke?" "It's not a joke," I said. I pressed a button and the screen behind me lit up with documentation. "I acquired this company 3 days ago for $500 million, every share, full ownership." I turned to Greg Miller, who was sweating profusely. "Mr. Miller has been running an employment scam for 18 months. He offers fake promotions to gullible middle managers, gets them to pay for fraudulent training programs, and pockets the money. Lucas, you were his next target. That promotion was never real." Lucas collapsed into a chair. His face had gone white. No, that's not true. He called me himself. He did, I agreed. Because you were stupid enough to believe him. You were about to pay $50,000 for an executive development course that doesn't exist. I turned to the FBI agents. Gentlemen, I believe you have everything you need. They nodded and escorted Greg Miller out. He didn't even look at Lucas as he passed. When the door closed, I turned my attention back to my family. Lucas, you're terminated effective last Friday. I've sent documentation of your performance record to every logistics company in North America. You falsified reports, took credit for other people's work, and sexually harassed 3 female employees. You'll never work in this industry again. Lucas made a choking sound. Tiffany took a step away from him. I looked at Tiffany. Ms. Morrison, I believe congratulations are in order, or perhaps condolences. I pulled up another screen. I hired a private investigator last month. These are photos of you with Marcus Davenport, the hedge fund manager you've been seeing behind Lucas's back for the past 4 months. You were planning to marry Lucas for his money, which he doesn't have, while keeping Marcus on the side until you could figure out which one was wealthier. The photos were explicit. Tiffany's face turned the colour of beets. I've already sent these to Marcus's wife, I added. She's filing for divorce. I believe you've lost both your backup plan and your primary target in one morning. Impressive. Tiffany let out a sound like a wounded animal and ran from the room, her borrowed Chanel heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. Lucas tried to go after her, but I held up my hand. Sit down, Lucas. I'm not done with you. He sat, and I had never seen my brother look so small. Finally, I turned to my father. He had been silent this whole time, his face cycling through emotions, trying to process what was happening. Dad, you mortgaged the house to give Lucas money for this fake promotion, didn't you? His silence was answer enough. The transfer was blocked, not because I was stealing from you, but because I own the bank that holds your mortgage. I bought your debt 6 months ago just in case something like this happened. Winston stood up, his legs shaking. You own the bank? I own a lot of things, Dad. 17 companies directly controlling shares in 32 others. My net worth is approximately $2.3 billion. I've been the Shark of Chicago for 7 years. While you were calling me a failure, I was buying and selling companies larger than anything you've ever even worked for. The silence in that room was absolute. I could hear the ventilation system, the distant sound of traffic 17 floors below the ragged breathing of my brother. But here's the thing, Dad, I continued, walking around the table toward him. I'm not going to save your house. You have 30 days to vacate before foreclosure. I'm going to tear it down and turn that lot into a parking facility for my employees. My father's face crumpled. And then, in a moment that would have moved me a week ago, he dropped to his knees. Baby girl, please. I'm sorry. I was wrong. That house is all we have. It's your mother's home. Please. The words baby girl hit me like a physical blow. He had never called me that. Not once in my entire life. It was always Lucas who got the pet names, the affection, the pride. I looked down at him, this man who had raised me to believe I was worthless, who had hit me, who had thrown me out of his house, and I felt nothing. That's not my problem anymore, I said quietly. You should have thought about that before you chose Lucas over me for the 1,000th time. You had 29 years to love me, Dad. You chose not to. I'm just returning the favour. Lucas started crying, actual tears running down his face. Tony, please. We're family. I turned to him. No, Lucas. We were family, past tense. You had every opportunity to treat me with basic human decency. You chose cruelty every single time. That was your choice. These are the consequences. I picked up my briefcase, my real briefcase, the Prada one that cost more than their car. Gentlemen, my assistant will escort you out. Security has been instructed not to allow you back into this building. If you attempt to contact me, I'll file a restraining order. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the floor. As I reached for the handle, my father called out, How could you do this to your own family? I looked back at him over my shoulder. I learned from the best dad. You taught me that family means nothing if there's no respect. You taught me that love has to be earned. Well, you never earned mine. And now you never will. I walked out, leaving them in that glass room, my father on his knees, my brother in tears. I rode the elevator down to the lobby. Through the glass walls, I could see them arguing, my father and Lucas, yelling at each other, pointing fingers, each blaming the other for their downfall. My mother, I learned later, had been waiting in the car and knew nothing of what had happened until they came out. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The Chicago wind hit me cold and sharp, carrying the smell of the lake. My driver pulled up in the Porsche, but I waved him off. "I'll walk," I said. He nodded and drove away. I walked down Michigan Avenue, my hair coming loose from its professional bun, whipping around my face in the wind. I reached up and pulled out the hairband, the cheap elastic thing from the drugstore, the last physical reminder of the girl I used to be. I held it for a moment, then let it go. The wind caught it and carried it away, tumbling down the street until I couldn't see it anymore. My phone buzzed. My assistant. "Ms. Castellano, your father and brother are requesting another meeting. They're in the lobby." I looked up at the sky, at the buildings I owned at the city that had made me who I was. "Tell security I don't have any relatives by those names," I said, "and book me a reservation at Alinea for one. I'm celebrating." That night, I sat alone in one of the most exclusive restaurants in the world, eating a 17-course tasting menu that cost more than my family's monthly mortgage payment. My phone kept buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My father had probably borrowed someone else's phone to try to reach me. I blocked each number as it appeared. Between courses, I drafted an email to my lawyers instructing them to proceed with the foreclosure without any exceptions or extensions. The waiter brought my final course, a dessert made to look like a balloon that deflated into a pool of chocolate when you popped it. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Ms. Castellano?" he asked. I looked at the dessert, at the beautiful absurdity of it, at the artistry and care that had gone into creating something so temporary. "Everything perfect," I said, and for the first time in my life I meant it. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and financial restructuring. My father's house went into foreclosure exactly on schedule. I heard through my network that they had moved into a small apartment in a not-so-nice part of town. Lucas was working at a fast food restaurant, the only job he could get after I had blacklisted him. Tiffany had moved to Los Angeles chasing another rich man, her reputation in Chicago destroyed. My mother called me once from a borrowed phone. I answered before I realized who it was. "Tony, please." Her voice was small, broken. "Your father is sick. The stress has caused a heart attack. We need help with the medical bills." I closed my eyes. For a moment, just a moment, I felt that old pull, that old need to fix things to save them. Then I remembered the wine in my face, my father's hand across my cheek, my mother standing silent while I was abused. "I'll pay for his medical care," I said, "but I'm doing it anonymously through a charity. He won't know it came from me. And this is the last time, Mum. The last time I help any of you." She was crying. "But why are you doing this to us?" "I'm not doing anything to you," I said softly. "I'm just not saving you from yourselves anymore. There's a difference. Goodbye, Mum." I hung up and blocked that number too. 6 months later, my company had restructured Vanguard into one of the most profitable logistics companies in the Midwest. I had promoted several women into executive positions, people who had been overlooked and underestimated just like I had been. I implemented policies for parental leave, mental health support, and protection against workplace harassment. I built the company I wished had existed when I was starting out. I never saw my family again. Sometimes I would get updates from people who knew them. My father recovered from his heart attack, but never returned to his old arrogance. He worked part-time as a consultant, making a fraction of what he used to earn. Lucas eventually found work in warehouse management, a long fall from the director position he had dreamed of. My mother just faded, becoming even more of a ghost than she had been before. Did I feel guilty? Sometimes. Late at night when the city was quiet and I was alone in my penthouse, I would wonder if I had gone too far, if I should have been more forgiving, more understanding, more like the daughter they had wanted me to be. But then I would remember that daughter, the one who sat at their table every week and let them tear her down, who kept hoping that this time would be different, who sacrificed her dignity for the dream of being loved. That girl was gone. I had killed her the night my father's hand hit my face, and I didn't miss her. I built a life that was mine, completely mine. I dated people who respected me. I made friends who saw my value. I donated millions to causes I believed in: scholarships for women, in business programs for abused children, shelters for people escaping toxic families. I took the pain they had given me and I transformed it into something that helped others escape the same trap. And every morning when I wake up and look out at the Chicago skyline, when I pour my coffee in my kitchen with its view of the lake, when I go to work in a building I own and make decisions that affect thousands of people's lives, I remember that I did this. Not my father, not my brother, me. The girl they called worthless built an empire while they weren't paying attention. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. They're not worth your anger or your pain. They're just characters in a story you've moved past, footnotes in the chapter of your life that you've already closed. I don't need their apology. I don't need their recognition. I don't need anything from them anymore. And that, more than anything else, is what freedom feels like. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. You don't owe toxic people your suffering. Not your parents, not your siblings, not anyone. The people who are supposed to love you should lift you up, not tear you down. And if they can't do that, if they choose cruelty over kindness, exploitation over support, then you have every right to walk away. Not just to walk away, but to thrive without them. Your value doesn't come from their approval. Your worth isn't determined by how they treat you. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Remember that. Write it down. Tattoo it on your soul if you have to. Because the moment you truly believe, it is the moment you become free. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and keeping the peace? What would you have done in my position? Drop your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, if you needed to hear this today, hit that like button and subscribe, because you deserve to hear more stories about people who chose themselves and won. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need permission to be strong. Your life is yours to build. Don't let anyone else hold the blueprints.